You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 77. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. On today's episode, we talk about digital extensions in physical exhibits in museums in relation to a recent article in the journal SAA Advances. Let's get to it. Hey, podcast listeners. Do you find yourself wondering what the latest tablet or smartphone could do for your business? Wonder what GPS to pair with your device? Just trying to figure out how to go digital in the field without breaking the bank and or making a bad investment? Or did you find a technology company to work with but just aren't sure the questions you need to ask during the initial conversation? Well, you're not alone. There are literally thousands of tech combinations out there, and it can be really tough finding the right one for your business and your workflow. My name is Chris Webster, and I've been working in CRM since 2005, and I've been a tech enthusiast my entire life. I spend my time trying to figure out how to make archaeology more efficient both technologically and financially. No one is going to give you a big pile of money to do whatever you want with, so you have to make the most of what you have. The right gear can mean the difference between zero margins on that next project and an employee benefits package. That's where DigTech Concierge comes in. Let us be your technology guru. Whether you have just a few questions or want us on retainer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, we're here to help. With years of experience, tens of thousands of acres of survey done completely digitally, and many, many people trained, DigTech is your tech BFF, just waiting to guide you through this process now and through the inevitable changes to come. Should you hold on to those tablets or upgrade? What about the new operating system? Will it crash your apps, or can you go ahead and do it? We know the answers and can guide you to a profitable year. Go to www.digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge to book a consultation or book us for the year. The yearly retainer includes unlimited calls and support and company training on software and gear. That's digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge. And concierge is CONCIERGE. To get going and go digital today. Call us before you make any decisions. We've been there before. All right, welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 77, as I mentioned in the introduction. And today we are talking about another article from SAA Advances. Paul, how's it going?
It's all right. We're back at school after 2 weeks of spring break, and I'm not thrilled with that, but nothing really to complain about. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's April 3rd as we're recording this, so a lot of people are just finishing up their spring breaks or going on their spring breaks. I don't know these things. I don't have kids, and I don't know anyone in college, so I'm totally, like, the only knowledge I have of spring break is the random things that people tell me about it, so...
Well, my kids go to the same school that I work at, so we're on the exact same schedule for our breaks, which is really nice, but this time we didn't do anything. We just kind of hung out in the house.
Yeah, didn't even get any skiing in, huh? With all that snow you had?
No. Got 1 day of skiing in.
Oh, there you go.
No.
All right. Well, for today's podcast, we went back to the well that is Advances in Archaeological Practice from the Society for American Archaeology. It's one of their online journals. If you are a subscriber to, or if you're a member of the SAA, you can get this article. It's from 2018, what is that, volume 6 or something like that? Archaeological Practice 6, parentheses 1. I don't know how they do these things. 2018, pages 82 through 87. And again, we'll have the DOI link in the show notes and the article in the show notes as well. And this article is entitled An Extension Without an Exhibition. And it's under the digital reviews column, so it's a kind of actually a shorter article. It's not a full research article. The subtitle is Considering the Continued Life and Usefulness of a Digital Heritage Output by L. Megan Dennis. And she's at Gingery Gamer on Twitter, so she's pretty prolific on there. Go check her out. And Megan Dennis is a host, and hopefully we'll have some more episodes coming up because there's a great podcast of the 8-Bit Test Bit podcast right here on the Archaeology Podcast Network. So, Paul, what did you, because I mean, this is all about museums, kind of, and I rant all the time about museums. So we'll start with you. What are your initial thoughts on this? Well, how about you give us a quick synopsis maybe of the general idea what this article is about?
The general idea about this article is it's reviewing a digital component, a web deliverable of a website that was designed for a an exhibition at the Bard Graduate Center in 2014, I think. And the exhibition is now closed, but the digital content is still available online. So it's reviewing the digital content as kind of an artifact, a fossil even of that exhibition. And it's using it to discuss some of the issues related to having these electronic components that go along with exhibitions and museums. Now, I thought that it was, interesting enough on its own sake, but I think that it highlights, not just for museums, but for a lot of different projects and different things that we publish on the web. It highlights a lot of the problems that people have and often have because they haven't really thought it through about having content that's available in perpetuity. What happens to it when it stops being updated? What happens to it when what it refers to out here in the real world doesn't exist anymore, like this exhibition? And so from that point, it's a jumping off point for discussions. I thought it was really quite interesting. I didn't know that it was done by one of the hosts of the 8-Bit Test Pit, but as I was reading through it, that's what I was thinking. It's like, this reminds me of something that somebody that's really into archaeogaming would look at this problem, the eyes that somebody that is into archaeogaming would look at this problem with. And so it's kind of funny that, not terribly funny, but it was amusing to me at least that yes, it is through the eyes of somebody who's very into archaeogaming. So we hope to hear more from Megan later, as she revives the 8-Bit Test Pit podcast. What was your take of it?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. I, of course, had some different ideas, which we'll get to later, about how I think digital extensions should be looked at. And that's what they're talking about here, is a digital extension of a physical exhibit. You've got something in a museum, and it's like the thing that they roll across TV shows sometimes, like The Daily Show used to do that. For more information and extended interviews, go to www. That's kind of what they're talking about here. And this particular exhibit really seemed as though it lended itself well to that kind of thing, because this the interface experience was an exhibit around early computing, and not just computing, but video games, computers, and internet browsers. It sounds like interface experience means like, how do you interface with the digital world kind of thing, is what I'm getting out of that. So, and this is, of course, 2014. So anything since then is not in the exhibit, but and as they're building up to it, it's really more likely 2013 or something like that. But either way, I thought it was really interesting to talk about this, because it seems like when things are based around, say, universities and places with a seemingly unending flow of money and resources, sometimes these websites get put up. Like my account at the University of Georgia in Athens, when I went to grad school there, I graduated there in 2010, I think it was. And up until at least a year ago, I could still access my email and get access to the library and get access to JSTOR and get access to all those things, because nobody was really minding the store on that one. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't really actually trying to find out if I was still there. And I feel like these old websites are kind of fall in the same place. They have lots of server space. They don't have anybody from an IT standpoint that's really curating these old websites and saying, well, these need to be shut down. These are still on. How many times do you go to a graduate student's website or something like that on a faculty page, and it's just completely out of date? I mean, you can look at it and tell it's completely out of date just from some of the dates that are on there. And it's like, nobody is checking this stuff. And so I wonder what the validity of an article like this would be with a more mainstream museum that is not tied to an academic institution. Like, for example, any of the museums in Washington, D.C., New York, some of the big museums, do they have digital extensions? And I'm willing to bet a lot of them probably have something, at least on their website, about it. Do they have digital extensions, and do they pull that stuff down, or do they leave it up? Paul, you have some intimate relationships with a museum over there in New York. Do you know, this might not be archaeology or history related, but do you know anything about if they have digital extensions similar to this, and if they really pull them down or try to leave them up for a while afterwards and then maintain them?
They do, and they're trying to, and what I'll speak about here is the one that I know best, which is the Met Museum. I've mentioned before, my wife's a curator in the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art there. So that's my in to the Met Museum, aside from everybody else that I know that works there. Mostly through her. So she's still my in.
Right.
But the Met has been undergoing a big process of cleaning up their digital presence. And there are a lot of different components to it. They've got a very active and, in my experience, a very competent digital media department that has taken control of this. And they lost their head a couple years ago, but I'd met him and he was really very sharp, very on top of it. And I don't know who's taken after him, but whoever has seems to be of the same ilk. It seems to be somebody that really has a good idea about what has to be cleaned up. And so I know my wife has been doing a lot of work with, as a big museum, they have their collections available online. For researchers, for students, and so on. And she's been doing a lot of work bringing what they have had online into set standards that the museum has put forward for how they're going forward with revealing the collections on through their database online over the internet. Then there's the other components. Every time they have an exhibition, there are sites for, or pages for, in their major site for those exhibitions. Anything that's a short-term exhibition or something that's going to be time limited. There are ones for their permanent collections and their permanent galleries, and all that stuff. As I go to it, and I don't follow it terribly closely, but every time I go to the Met's website, I see that it's been cleaned up and hashed out a little bit, regularized in a lot of ways. So I know that there is at least the intent and to some extent the active involvement of a department that's dedicated to keeping their web presence clean and efficient and so on. I don't know what happens with things like, and I could check. A couple years ago, there was a UNESCO sponsored event uniting a bunch of museums around the world, including the Met, that were discussing different aspects of Yemeni antiquities. And I was invited by somebody there to put together a thing about the Met's pre-Islamic Yemeni antiquities, because that's my specialty. And again, because I had a very distinct in to the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art. And so there was, we had some tours, we had a Facebook live event and web pages and blog articles that I submitted, that were online for a while. And I should go and dig those up, because those are something that would, I think, really fall into what Megan is discussing in her article. I mean, very similar in that it's a time limited event. It's something that happened a couple years ago over the course of a week. It's not current anymore, but somebody who's interested in Yemeni antiquities might be interested in seeing those old blog posts and seeing the archived video footage. I don't know that stuff is still available. I don't know if that stuff gets culled by the museum or if it gets archived in some manner that can be referenced by future researchers. And that'd be interesting to see, because I do know that the other museum that I have a lot of contact with, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, has had in the past some pages that just kind of fall to bit rot, Yeah. And I know these get cleaned up when the galleries get cleaned up. And I know that because what I know most intimately is from a traveling exhibition of antiquities from Ur, that my dissertation advisor put together an exhibition for. It was a very popular exhibit, went around the world, was gone for a number of years. I've referenced things and assigned my students certain web pages from the extension that was done for that exhibition. And I've noticed over the years little bits of it, some links that stop working, some media that don't load properly anymore, that sort of thing. So that's, I know it's being redone now because they're going to be reopening the Ancient Near East galleries later this month. but I haven't followed along to see how they've gone and revamped that. I do know, though, from both these experiences that this process of renewal, of culling the old stuff and renewing what's available, is important and is definitely a concern of museums, whether or not they have the resources, as apparently the Met does, to do that in a fairly comprehensive and an efficient manner, or if it's just done by whoever thinks of it at the time at the museum. I suspect that most museums, it's more the latter. It's, hey, why do we still have this website up? Somebody asked, they sent in an email saying, I can't access this page I used to access. Why is that?
Yeah, then it just gets taken down.
And then it just gets taken down, right. And then it's lost. And that's in some ways just as bad as having kind of crufty old websites up. So,
yeah.
I don't have any solution for it, but I do see it a lot.
I know. In 2018 here, and I understand that museums especially are a little, especially like history museums, are a little slow to come to the technology curve, just like the rest of history and archaeology and things like that are. So I'm not going to, begrudge them for how they're doing things now, but looking at the future and how we could, possibly change things in the future is, I don't think that these web experiences should be extensions. I feel like they should almost be the experience, and then the museum is the physical extension, because the reason for that is the museum part is 9 times out of 10 the temporary part, because unless there's some kind of permanent exhibit that's just someplace, then that is the permanent part. But whatever aspect of the exhibit is more permanent, they should actually pour more time and energy into staying current and keeping going, because that's the way people are going to experience that. Like, we're talking about this interface exhibit here, the interface experience. I mean, there was presumably a lot of stuff sitting in a museum that was behind glass display cases and stuff like that. That stuff didn't go away. It just went into a storage room, or it went to somebody else's, departmental display unit or something like that like 4 people a day are going to see. Whereas the website has the potential to still be viewed by millions and millions of people if they would just maintain it. And the original message of the exhibit will still be there. If they do it right. I mean, what Megan's pointing out here is they didn't really do it right. It's an okay demonstration of things, but there's no explanation on why certain things were chosen and other things were left out as a display of certain technologies, which is a really good analysis of this exhibit as a whole. Like, why did you choose to put that up there and then not these things? And there's no description whatsoever. It's because the interesting thing about an interface exhibit, a digital interface exhibit, is that the actual digital interface doesn't seem like they paid a lot of attention to it. And like their own website could be in the 2020 interface exhibit. Like, hey, look at this last one. This is the kind of shit they were doing in 2014. But no, I mean, I applaud them for, I guess, keeping it up. But as she also points out in the article here, is this was an academic thing. It was based on, I think she said it was based on a year's worth of coursework. And then, what the result was basically this exhibit. And one of her questions near the end of the article is basically what should be the requirements of the students, and not only students, but institutions once the students have moved on. When something happens, students are all fired up for the 4 years they're in college, or longer if they're in grad school. They're all fired up for that, and then they leave and go on and do other things. And the stuff that they were doing is basically just left for either to die or for other people to deal with. And it doesn't seem like there's any long-term thought put into what should be done with that stuff. And that's also an interesting aspect of this. But even big museums like the Met, I mean, I'm sure, I've never been to the Met, Paul, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure there are probably some permanent exhibits there that you can go and always see. Like, a lot of the museums down in Washington, D.C., there are just some permanent exhibits there that never go away. They just add to them, or, maybe modify them slightly. But the online experience for the non-permanent exhibits, the temporary exhibits, the traveling exhibits, that stuff, I mean, it's impermanent by nature at the museum. So the online experience is really going to be the one that people focus on. And museums are always scrambling for money too. They're always scrambling for funding in one way or another. It seems like they could pretty easily have a lightly ad supported website, and you wouldn't even need to be very intrusive about it. Not like clickbait websites. Just put a few things on there, and then the millions of hits they'll get will just aggregate into, something to at least pay for the website and keep it going. I don't know. But Anyway, let's continue this discussion on the other side of the break, and so I can alienate even more of the museum crowd. We'll be back in a second. Hey, podcast fans and digital archaeologists. Have you heard about WildNote? It's a data collection app that works online or offline on your smartphone or tablet, iOS or Android. It allows you to collect field data easily, manage data efficiently, and generate data reports and site records effortlessly. We have a growing list of state site forms built in for your use and some generic forms that will work anywhere. Check out the shovel testing and photograph forms. You can get a free all-access 30-day trial today by going to wildnoteapp.com. That's wildnoteapp.com for your free 30-day trial. Now back to the show.
All right. Welcome back to episode 77 of the Archaeotech podcast. Chris and I are discussing an extension without an exhibition, a recent article by Megan Dennis. And she's talking about web content that's related to exhibitions and the curation of that web content and what happens after the exhibition itself has ceased to be. And Chris, you were mentioning a few things that just really fired a bunch of synapses with me right at the end there about how you think that they ought to be structured. And I thought that the notion that you had of the web deliverable being the primary and the exhibition then being the extension to it is interesting. I don't think that a lot of museum people would go for that. Some may. But if you just think of it purely in terms of access to numbers of people worldwide over time, it certainly makes a lot of sense to invert what's considered the primary and what's considered the ancillary information here. But I did have a couple issues, not with what you were saying, but that red flags that I thought of, and I'm sure there are a bunch of other issues possibly, about having the web content be the permanent exhibition and the physical exhibition being the temporary in conception. One very simple one is look and feel. And, it's mentioned in Megan's article. She mentions that the look and feel of the website that she's reviewing is still fairly current. Right. The metaphors, right. the display, the look and feel of that website doesn't feel old, but we've all gone to web pages that look and feel old and crufty. And I know that if I were to go to any museum's website from 1998, assuming they had one, it would look like it's from 1998. And so as museums being public institutions and wanting to present a public face, have to update their materials regularly, at least just so that they don't look backwards and out of date, even if the content is good. So, with reference again to the Met, which I was talking about, they a couple years ago, they redid their logo. Well, any web page that they were delivering tied to an exhibition that they had 5 years ago would now have an old logo on it, not a new logo. So that's a problem that would have to be tackled. If you're not wrapping everything into some dynamic, templating system. If you are, then what's happened is you change the look and feel of that website as it goes forward. So you don't actually have a snapshot that relates to when the exhibition was started and when the website for that exhibition was first built, but you have something that's kind of a hybrid of then and now. And then the other thing, and this is more of a legal issue, is you mentioned traveling exhibitions, and certainly a lot of museums have websites that go along with traveling exhibitions that come through their venues. And I would think that might be a sticky issue in some cases where you have objects that are on loan that don't belong to the museum that's currently exhibiting them, but belong to some other museum, and that the museum that owns the object, that's lending the object, might have issues about the host museum, the one that has the traveling exhibition going through it, presenting that object as something not in their permanent collection, but online permanently in some way that might give somebody the idea that it's part of their permanent collection. So, those are two little sticking points that I thought of immediately thinking about how one would successfully invert what is the main part of the exhibition and what's the extension between the physical and the online presence. Did you have any? You had some other takes on it too, I think.
Yeah, indeed. And I also thought while you were saying all that of another T-shirt that I want to make, and it'll be an Indiana Jones style quote that says, "It belongs in the digital extension of a physical exhibit in a museum." Do they get anybody buy that? I don't think so. If I put a hashtag in front of it, maybe they will. No, anyway, right.
Just
one of the things that I was thinking about as I was discussing at the end as well, and then what you brought up at the same time is the common, as a podcaster, I'm always trying to get conferences that I go to allow recordings of some of the papers and presentations. And usually the thing that you hear is something about security, right? Like, oh, what if somebody says something? We don't want that on the internet. Sure, I'll give you that. But that's what editing is for. But I'll give you that. But some of the bigger organizations are worried that if we record all the presentations and put them online, even behind their secure paywall, that people won't go to the conference because they'll get all the information there. But what they don't realize is people go to a conference for networking. They go to see people. They go for the experience. They go for the book room and the exhibit hall. And where I'm going with this is museums, I would imagine, when they're talking about, if they were to have the discussion amongst themselves about, hey, let's make the digital extension the actual primary part of the exhibit here, somebody is going to say, well, would anybody come to our museum if they could have an amazing experience online? And my answer to that is a resounding yes. And the biggest examples of that are basically, the big stuff that you still go to. Pompeii gets millions of visitors every single year, and yet there isn't a single bit of that city that isn't photographed online somewhere. If I wanted to see Pompeii as a tourist, I could probably layer together a series of photographs and create a flip book and actually walk through Pompeii with pictures I just found in a Google image search, right? I mean, it's probably one of the most photographed things on the planet. That and any other monumental excavation the pyramids of Giza, I've never seen them, but I have an exact picture of what they look like in my head. Now, does that mean I don't want to go there? Does that mean I don't want to have the experience? I've been to Pompeii before. I was there in 1996 when I was in the Navy. And, I had images of what that was like in my head that were different than ones I think I remember seeing since then, since the internet became a thing. And my wife had never been, and she also had her own images of Pompeii. And when we went a couple of years ago, she was just blown away by actually the experience of just being there. And I think that's what museums can do here. They can create an online, amazing virtual experience, thinking even far into the future with, virtual reality experience related to the exhibit or something like that, anything you can access online. I mean, right now you can have 3D reconstructions of the artifacts that you can spin around, play with, look at. You can do all kinds of things. You could have audio, you could have video, you could make a really interactive experience online, whereas that's really difficult to do in person. And I think people would enjoy doing both. If you make them both a unique experience, yet enhancing each other, when one of them goes away, usually the physical one goes away, you'll still have that amazing online experience and not just a list of pages full of text and a couple flat pictures. That's just not giving the thing that most people are going to see the credit that it's due.
Yeah.
Museums, even museums like the Met, probably gets millions of visitors a year too. I don't know what their numbers are, but there's in New York City, for Christ's sake, and it's a very famous museum. They probably get millions of visitors a year, especially over the summertime. And yet, how many people go to the website? I would imagine even more go to the website, because probably almost everyone that visits the museum at least went to the website once, if only to find out how much tickets cost or what are the hours or something like that. And then they could be funneled into something else. And if almost everybody that walked through the front door went to the website, there's an even higher percentage that went to the website and then didn't go for some reason, but was maybe sucked in by something else on the website. So, websites are where people go first. Why not increase that experience and then leave it there and curate it and make sure that you keep it updated and going and increase that awareness and that traffic, which is the whole point of the museum to begin with, is to increase awareness of something and show things and educate people. So if that's your mandate as a museum, then your digital expression of that should be paid more attention to. I don't know. It's kind of a long rant, but that's
no, I agree with you. And we touched on this last fall when you and I were sitting on the National Mall discussing the Smithsonian museums. Mm-hmm. And I think I said it then, and I'm going to repeat it now again, even if I did say it then, because it's been one of the favorite things I've ever heard in my life. Was years ago, I was working in college. I was working on my car one summer, and I had NPR, and somebody, I wish I could remember who said it, said what at the time stuck in my head as one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard. He said, people go to the Grand Canyon. Why do they go to the Grand Canyon? And the interviewer said, well, yeah, so to take a picture to prove that they were there. And he said, wrong. To prove that the Grand Canyon exists, not that they were there. And I thought, oh, that's so tedious. That's so overblown. But since then, I've come to think that is absolutely right. I mean, people go to the Mona Lisa, to see the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, even though they know exactly what it looks like, because they've seen drawings and pictures and takes on it ever since they were a little kid, but they still crowd around it at the Louvre to see the actual real thing. So you're concerned that some people might think that, well, if something's available online, why bother go see the real thing? I think that thought, not your thought, but what you're projecting other people to potentially worry about is entirely wrong. I think that people still absolutely want to see the real thing. I mean, we were looking at pictures of online of a Bruegel, and Bruegel's paintings are very detailed, lots of little figures, characters doing things off in the corners of the paintings, kind of half visible around a building or a wall or something. And as much fun as going and spending an hour just looking at every little detail that we could on that, by the end of it, I wanted to hop on a plane and go to Vienna to go check the real thing out, even though I know I couldn't even get it that close to the real thing, that I could see the same kind of detail I could online. It just whet my appetite for it. And now maybe I'm a little bit of an oddball that way, but I suspect that there are a lot of oddballs like that around the world that, having gotten a taste of something, web delivered, beautifully rendered, 3D, spin aroundable, put on a VR helmet and look at it in VR space, whatever, would then afterwards just want even more to go and see the real thing.
One of my examples of probably a really good museum to go to, is Cahokia in Illinois. And my thought is, especially when you were saying that, if your museum, and I'm thinking of some really small town museums, and they really don't have the funding to put up an awesome digital experience, and I understand that. But if your small museum or your museum exhibit is basically just things behind glass with maybe a little nameplate for explanation or something like that, maybe you've got a flyer or a pamphlet, then that really is the physical manifestation of a shitty website that just has pages and text and pictures. And if that's the case, maybe people won't go to your museum, because you just have basically things behind glass and very little explanation. But maybe that's a call to museum curators to actually create an exhibit that is an experience, an exhibit that people are going to remember. If you don't have monumental statues and architecture like Pompeii, like the Archaeology Museum in Naples I've talked about before on this show and other shows, still relatively disappointing from the standpoint that they have just a whole bunch of stuff in glass. However, that being said, some of the statues and the marble statues and things that are, the size of a house that are inside that museum are just breathtaking. I mean, you can't but awe at the artistry when you're standing beneath them. And sure, I could look at a picture of that, but I'm not going to get a sense of what that is by just looking at a picture. So they have those kinds of things, but other small museums don't. They have little artifacts, stuff like that can't be, that just aren't massive or neat to behold. It's really the story that you're looking at there. So if that's the case, build a great narrative around that story and give people an experience. And like I was saying about Cahokia, their online website is really, it's detailed in that it gives you a lot of information, but you don't get to see a lot of what's in Cahokia. There's a couple kind of pictures in the background, but I would recommend anybody that's ever seen anything online about Cahokia actually go to Cahokia, because you get to see even if you didn't get out and see the mounds, inside they have a recreated village inside of there, inside the interpretive center. And it's really well done. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I want to see. They've got actual artifacts and other things and like these created people. And it's not like a small diorama. It's life-size with life-size people and huts and people just living in this village. And that's just like my example of a great interpretive center and museum that really shows how life was at that time period on this site. And I wish other experiences were like that.
Well, related to that, even as an archaeologist, I'm sure you've done this before. I would do this anytime I was in the field. We would do field trips, day trips to other projects, to other sites, and there's nothing, I might have read a million different site reports and followed everything that happened on a particular project and tried to understand the stratigraphy and tried to understand the plan, tried to understand what's going on. And none of that is nearly as useful in my experience as going for a few hours to the actual website and talking with the actual dig site and talking to the excavators and having them explain it and then being able to see with my own eyes. I don't think that VR, web deliverables, any of that would actually ever be able to replace the physical going there. They could certainly augment it in a lot of ways. And I think that they would really whet my appetite for going to some places like Pompeii, which I don't need a whole lot of whetting my appetite anymore to go to Pompeii. I think I'd go there at the drop of a hat. But
not going to twist
my arm real hard. I was there as a little kid, and I'd like to go back. I don't remember a whole lot from back then, but I do remember it was really cool. I don't even know where I'm going with it. We've gone pretty far afield from the article now, but this is exactly what I was saying at the start. I said that she's focusing it specifically on web extensions to exhibitions, but the issues that she brings up with how things are portrayed on the internet, how they are maintained, what the relationship is to physical experiences, it extends well beyond just museums and their ancillary materials. It really applies to a lot of what we as archaeologists view the world and how we think about it in terms of a lot of the questions that we have about portrayal of objects, storage and retrieval and portrayal of data and information. You and I talk about archivability of our data. It touches on all these things, even though it seems like it's a fairly narrow thing just by the title and, a few short pages of a very nice little article.
And I think Megan actually nails it with her very last sentence of the article here. She says, and I'm just going to read it here. She says, "We are beginning to see our first digital outputs as distant enough to be considered as digital heritage on their own, but we have yet to learn as practitioners from that heritage to make changes in our outputs going forward." I guess the last two sentences. "It is the attitude of complacency built on the ease of producing digital products that needs to change before such poor practice becomes so entrenched disciplinarily that we cannot change it." So, I mean, the whole thing we tell people as archaeologists and heritage practitioners is learn from the past, move on, right? Learn from the past, move on. And we're not learning from our own past as digital heritage practitioners, people who are building things on the web. And what she's saying is it's almost not old enough for us to really be considered digital heritage, but it's becoming digital heritage. We need to learn from that, correct those mistakes, and move on before it becomes an entrenched idea. That's the thing I would worry about is people in museum studies courses now being taught, oh, well, you're going to put up this fantastic display. Here's how you get people through the museum. There's all these psychological things you probably do to turn people's eye this way, one way or the other. Here's what people like to see. Here's what people don't like to see. Oh, and by the way, throw up a couple web pages regarding the exhibit with no actual thought towards the digital experience. It's basically some geek that happens to work at the museum who happens to know HTML or something like that can, put up a quick website, and it's almost an afterthought compared to the massive amount of care that's often put into the physical exhibits. I mean, these people really, as your wife can probably attest to, pour their heart and soul into an exhibit when they're putting these things together. But then, the digital extension of that, there's fewer people concerned with how that looks and how that's portrayed. And that's what I think needs to change. And I think that's actually what Megan is saying too.
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah. All right. Well, I think we nailed that for such a short article. I knew that even though it was short, that we'd have a lot to say on this topic, because digital heritage is really where it's at. If you want to hit the numbers, you want to hit as many people as possible. The only way to do that in today's world is to put it online and to do it the right way. So, yeah. All right. Well, links to this article will be in the show notes, and we'll have Megan's Twitter handle on there too. She's pretty active on social media, so you can probably ask her about this yourself, and I'm sure she would respond. And we'll go from there. So we'll be back in just a second with our App of the Day segment. And in the meantime, go to arcpodnet.com/members to look at supporting us on the Archaeology Podcast Network. We'll be back in a second. Tired of the webinars and training offered by the big organizations not being free for members and not really covering what we need? Team Black has the answers. Check out arccert.black/main for our upcoming webinar schedule. All of our webinars happen once a month, and seating is limited. Learn everything from field tech basics to drones to digital workflows. We have more classes coming online every month. Classes are always 1 hour and cost just $20. Classes like building a CV and getting a job are always free. That's right. We'll help you get a job, then we'll be here when you want to level up your skills. If you are a professional subscriber to the APN at arcpodnet.com/members, then you get all of Team Black's offerings for free as part of your membership. We have Team Black memberships coming that will give the same for the APN. So $20 a month gets you all the APN swag and extras, plus free training from Team Black. So check out arccert.black for more information and level up your skill set today. That's arccert.black. Now back to the show. All right, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 77, and this is the App of the Day segment. We've actually skipped this the last couple of weeks because we've had a lot to talk about, and I actually had some other ideas for apps, and I've got them written down, but I just wanted to say something real fast this time, and it's not really an app of the day, but more of a cautionary tale regarding the devices that you're using in the field and the GPS that you're using in the field. So let me back up a little bit. We've talked about a lot of apps in the past, like GPS tracks and Avenza PDF maps, things like that, that actually use your device's onboard GPS. And whether you're talking about an iPhone, Android, tablet, smartphone, I don't care what it is. A lot of these that have a GPS, they generally all use pretty much the same chipset, right, to produce their GPS signals, or at least to read the GPS signals from the satellites. But that being said, there's a lot of stuff inside there. And the primary object of these devices, unlike even a cheap Garmin, the cheap Garmin's primary goal is to tell you where you're at. Like, that's its sole function, is to say, here I am, and here's where I need to go to get to where I want to be. But your tablet or your smartphone, its primary function is, I don't even know if we know what the primary function is anymore, because they're not phones, they're not computers, they're kind of both, and people do all kinds of things with them. So who knows? But it's definitely not the GPS. So that being said, location-based services are really important for a lot of these devices, and they only need to be accurate enough to really say, am I standing in front of this store? Am I standing on this block? Something like that. So their accuracy is definitely limiting. Now, most of them tout the same thing that, like your cheap Garmin's will, your handheld GPSs, they'll say, 3 to 5 meter accuracy, stuff like that. But that can seriously be affected by other stuff around you, other things running on the phone, other interferences from other antennas on the phone, because unlike a GPS, the phone also has Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, multiple cellular antennas if they're running both networks, and most modern cell phones are checking both the CDMA and the GSM networks. And so they've got all kinds of internal signals going on inside of these things. And not only that, but it's all packed tightly into a really small device. And that really small device is being affected probably by things that you're wearing. So where am I going with all this? Well, about a year and a half ago, when Pokemon Go came out, my wife jumped on that bandwagon, and she downloaded that app and was playing it. I wasn't really interested for one reason or another, and I never downloaded it, never got into it. Well, about a week and a half ago, as we're talking here on April 3rd, we saw a whole bunch of people out just like playing it when we went to see this movie, and everybody was like heads down and doing these weird things, and I had no idea. So she pulled up in the app. She hadn't opened it in over a year, and started checking it out. And I was like, all right, let me see what this whole thing is all about. And I downloaded it. So I'm not going to go into Pokemon Go. That is not our app of the day. However, what I will tell you is it is a heavily GPS-based application. If the GPS is not working, the app doesn't work because it has to know where you are physically in your space, because it overlays like this other dimensional map that's in its world on top of your own world, right? And so you have to physically know where you're at and physically go places. Well, I'll tell you what, we've walked around the city a few times and even outside the big buildings in like the suburbs with the app turned on just to see how it's working. And every once in a while, the little character on the screen that's supposed to represent where you are will just run like 6 blocks in one direction and be somewhere else, and then come back. And then you'll get a GPS error, and it'll run off in another direction and come back, and you'll get a GPS error. And then it'll do all kinds of weird things, and you get all these weird GPS errors. And I guess the reason I'm telling you this is that most of the other apps that you're using out there, I've never seen GPS tracks or Venza PDF maps tell me there was a GPS error. Never seen it once, ever. But every single person that's used an app on a smartphone for, say, hiking or something like that has probably seen that occasional spike where, you know, your line is following the trail nicely, and then all of a sudden it shoots a half mile off to the east and then comes back to your trail. That's because it lost signal reception for some reason and picked you up in some other place and then came back. So I'm only telling you this because in the App of the Day segment, we talk about a lot of apps that are location-based that use GPS, and a lot of people are using these things for transects, for marking things that don't need to be a sub-meter accuracy, like photographs, shovel test, whatever the case may be. And you have no way of knowing what your GPS accuracy is. So just be careful. Maybe sit there. If you have the ability to average the waypoint, which I think GPS tracks and possibly MotionX GPS will let you average the point. And averaging the point just means that Trimble's do this too, and so do Garmin's. Averaging a waypoint, if you don't know what this is, it's basically just taking the point over and over and over and over again until you tell it to stop, and then it's going to take the average of all those locations. It's going to knock out anything that was an outlier. So if it spiked during that time and went somewhere else, it's going to knock that out in the average. And it's going to give you a more accurate point. So that's all I wanted to say. Because the Pokemon Go app is so heavily GPS based, they decided to code in the fact that you're having a GPS error and let you know that and give you a graphical demonstration of that on the screen. But I've never seen another app actually tell you that your GPS has just gone wonky. And these are actual location based apps. So it's really a cautionary tale, and that's it for my App of the Day segment. No real app to speak of, but a cautionary tale about other location-based apps.
Well, I'll mention one thing very quickly that's related to that is that I'd mentioned on the App of the Day a few episodes ago that I use a program called Trace Snow whenever I go skiing to find out what runs I've gone and what I'm most concerned is what my top speed was. And that's always been in the back of my mind. It's getting the speed from the GPS. And what's happened if, it's, just for a moment, it doesn't have to be long, but decided that I'm 100 meters over there and then 100 meters back. Wow, look at that. I was doing 80 for a bit there, wasn't I? That's pretty impressive. Yeah. No, I haven't had that, but my top speeds, I'm always a little suspect. How come on this one run, even though I was doing low 40s all day long, this one run, it said that I topped out at 52 miles an hour. Is that real, or is that just a GPS blip? And there's no way of knowing.
That's pretty fast on skis.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I imagine it is. Yeah, it's funny in that Pokemon Go app when you're in a car and you're actually, I don't know what the speed threshold is, but when you exceed the speed threshold for like walking or jogging, it comes up with a screen that says, "Hey, danger, don't do this while you're driving." And you can select the button that says, "I'm a passenger," and then you can use it while you're driving. Well, when it has that GPS error, that's another indication that it's had some sort of wacky thing happen, because you can be sitting there not moving at all, and all of a sudden it comes up and says, "Are you driving?" Because you just went 50 miles an hour in the other direction while sitting there and then came back. So yeah. Again, I wish the other GPS applications out there, when it's a GPS application, it should give you accuracy statistics. And I know GPS Tracks actually has a little accuracy thing down there, but there's not a lot of detail on it, and it doesn't seem to change much. And I'm not really sure I even trust it. So I just wish they would focus a little more on the quality of the GPS signal that you're getting versus what they typically do, which is just let you drop points and do things willy-nilly and go on about your business. It just seems like they should pay more attention to that. And so,
well, one other little quick detail, and I don't want to labor the point too much. Maybe this is its own episode, but GPS is really susceptible to things like foliage overhead, and especially to reflective surfaces like buildings and cliff walls.
Right.
So, it'd be nice if you're using something for a scientific purpose, if you have an assessment of the quality of your signal, so you can try to, average out or eliminate even those readings that are pretty suspect because of one of those things that get in the way of your signal.
Yeah. And a good example of that is actually the Trimble. When you're, usually the signal quality is set pretty high on those things by default. Mm-hmm. And if you do get in a canyon, or you get over overhead power lines, or you're in dense forest or something like that, it simply won't take a point unless you really reduce the quality. Then what are you using it for? But it simply won't turn on because it doesn't have enough satellites. Whereas your Garmin will keep taking a point. Your phone will keep taking a point, right, but you have no idea how poor that quality is. So that's the caution there. So, all right, well, it's probably time to move on from this. What do you got today, Paul?
Okay, so this one will be fairly quick, not because there isn't a lot that should be said about it, but because I unfortunately left my tablet out in the country along with all my clean clothes when I came back after
nice.
the break. So chalk this one up to my absent-mindedness and stupidity. I put it all together so that I wouldn't forget it. And then I forgot everything all at once. But anyhow, one of the things that always gets me a little claustrophobic, and I really can't say it any other way, when I use something like an iPad or a phone, is that I, as a computer user, I very heavily use the command line, and regardless of what operating system I use. I mean, preferentially, I use Mac OS, and I'm in the terminal all the time. And, but I also heavily use Linux, and I use Windows quite a bit, on servers, and they're just things, most things I can do without necessarily having to open up a command line, but I like chaining different tasks and doing different kinds of text and data cleanup on the command line. And so when I go on an iPad and I don't have access to a command line, I feel a little constrained. And that's something that really bothers me. So I've been working on a programming project, kind of a silly little experiment that I'm doing with a Raspberry Pi. And it was being a web server. And I wanted to test a few things, and I had to shell into it. And I could have shelled in from my laptop, but I decided I wanted to shell in from that Kindle Fire 7-inch that I'd mentioned a few episodes back that I've been playing with. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's nothing special as far as a tablet goes. It's pretty low end. It's, not unlike the first generation iPad mini that I used to have. But so I quickly went into the Google Play Store and I looked around for an SSH program so I could shell into that Raspberry Pi. And, it came up with a whole bunch of them, and I looked through, and the one that had the screenshots that looked not too disgusting to me, I decided to download that and play with it. And as luck would have it, it's a program called Termux, Termux. It's only available for Android. It doesn't work on iOS because iOS doesn't give you this kind of access. I mean, there are SSH programs for iOS, and I use them on my phone anytime I have to shell into one of my servers here at work. But what Termux does that I was not expecting, it was totally fine as an SSH terminal, but it also allows you to install command line tools in a manner that's very similar to how you do so on any of the Debian Linuxes. With so Debian for installing, generally you do it with a program called apt-get, and Termux has something of a clone of that you can then install command line applications into your Android tablet directly in that application, and then access them and do certain things with them that I found extremely handy for debugging on this Raspberry Pi programming project. So again, if I'd be able to talk about it more intelligently, if I'd actually brought my tablet with me and I could say what specifically I could do with it that I can't do with something else. But the fact that somebody has gone and made a program that allows me a fairly full featured terminal, not just for shelling into a different machine, but for actually working directly on the tablet, that is really cool to me. And that's something I enjoyed finding a lot. And it was purely by accident.
Well, it's pretty cool. And I there's a link to it on our show notes page, Archaeotech/77. And I pulled it up on the Google Play Store here, and it says beta after the title. And I'm like, beta, okay. I wonder how long this thing has been around. I don't see a date on here, but it's got 11,047 reviews, and it's sitting at just over 4.5 stars, 4.7 stars. For 11,000 plus reviews to be at 4.7 stars, that's some pretty high praise for that application.
Yeah, and I would think, sometimes when you see high star ratings, you think, a bunch of sock puppetry or bots, and I've been entirely impressed with this program. The one thing that does kind of bother me a little bit is that on my iOS, on my iPhone, I use a shell program. Let me see if I can find the name here quickly. I use one called Unix Reflection. And I think there's a version of that for Android as well. And that gives me access, gives me a little pop-up over the keyboard so I can do things like type the control character, which isn't available on the regular iOS keyboard. I can tab. I can do things that are really helpful when working on the command line. Termux has that, but not as a little overlay that happens on the keyboard. It does it through a combination of the regular keys and the volume controls on the device. So, working on the command line, if I want to go up to a previously issued command, I'll do an up arrow on my Mac or on a Linux machine. And I can just press the up arrow button if I'm using Unix Reflection on my iOS. But if I want to do that on Termux, I have to hit the up volume and the W key. So I didn't know that at first. And I was like, I can't use this. It's unusable. And then I saw that shortcut, and, it took me a minute to get the muscle memory to actually do that. But once I did that, hey, it's totally usable again. It's just, not quite as slick in that one little aspect as some of the other terminal emulation programs that I've used. But then again, it does so much more than just a regular terminal emulation program. So that 4.5 stars that it's got, I'll believe it.
Yeah. And I was just looking, because I went and typed this in because I was wondering, I haven't done it too much, but you can, as of a couple iOS updates ago, actually I think over a year ago, you can actually add new keyboards to iOS. Now, you've been able to do that to Android for a long time, but for iOS, they just allowed that like maybe a year ago. But you can add new keyboards, and I was wondering, do they not have a keyboard that you can put on that would actually have all those keys that the iPad typically doesn't use, like a control and stuff like that? Like, for example, my physical keyboard, because I know when the on-screen keyboard comes up, that stuff's typically missing. But like my physical keyboard, that's a Logitech one that's hooked to my iPad Pro, has control, alt, option, command, stuff like that. Has a tab key, has all that stuff here, but it doesn't have it on the physical keyboard. Well, anyway, when I typed that in, I saw an article from January 8th, 2018 about a new app called Terminal for iOS. It says, bring the command line to iPad and iPhone. Terminal is a sandboxed command line environment for iOS that has over 30 commands currently available, covering many of the most used command line tools and commands and love.
I had to look at that. So that sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, I don't know what you can do with it. This is really out of my realm. I really don't know a lot about doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, it sounds like people are at least thinking about it. So I don't know if you can access another application through it or do anything like that. But I don't know what the usability of this is. But I'll link to this article in the show notes so people can see it, play around with it.
Thanks.
Yeah. So anyway, speaking of, my app just completely crashed here. I'll just mention in the last couple seconds here too, just so people know, iOS 11.3 recently came out. And if you're listening to this podcast, it's iOS 11.3 has been out for about 3 weeks, and it's available for, actually there's a Watch app update, and there's also iPhone and iPad update as well. Now, as we mentioned before, this is a 0.3. This isn't 0.2 point something. This is 0.3. And in Apple world, that's a massive update. They added a lot of things. They changed some security regulations. I mean, they just did a ton of stuff to add to this. So if you haven't updated yet, by the time you're listening to this podcast, I suggest you go do so, because a lot of times, even if you don't care about the extra features, the security upgrades are pretty critical, because hackers out there and other people are trying to always figure out ways to break into these devices. And these whole number, well, in Apple's world, this is basically a whole number update. These at least 10th updates in Apple world are massive. I mean, they're really, really important for keeping your device as secure as possible. So definitely check that out and get your update done.
And this one has the one thing that that Apple got into some hot water with over the last few months was throttling people's iPhones when their batteries get old. And that's one of the top features of this new iOS update is iPhone battery health beta. So it's supposed to be able to tell you what condition your battery is in, so you can have better control of that as the end user.
Yeah, and I actually, let's see. Let's look at mine. My maximum capacity is 99%. So because I did update to 11.3, I'm running an iPhone 10, 256 gigabyte that I got right when they came out. The only thing it says inside here is maximum capacity. And my battery is currently supporting normal peak performance. So I guess that's good. I'll have to look at this when it gets down a little lower, like let the battery run down a little bit and see if it throttles me when I get below that, when I get that 20% warning. But I think it's interesting that my maximum capacity is 99%. Have I dropped 1%, or is that just batteries in general? They're never like 100%. You know what I mean? Like, was it even 100% when I pulled it out of the box? Or was it just like instantly 99%?
Is it a rounding error in their program? It's just beta.
Right. And that's the other thing too. People still have old notions of batteries and things. Like NiCads back when rechargeable batteries first became a thing. Yeah, you really had to maintain those really well. But these new LiPos, I mean, they're pretty robust batteries. And I mean, I put my phone on the charger every single night. I mean, I don't care what I'm doing or how much battery is left on it, because I have this sleep alarm thing that monitors and, is on all night long. So I pretty much have to run it on the charger overnight or it will die. And even so, every night for the last, 6 months, I've had the phone, 5 months, and the battery health is still at 99%. That's not too bad. So, it's, I'll take it. But all right. So we thought this was going to be our shorter segment, and we went 20 minutes. So just serves us right. I know, right? So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. And send in your comments and questions. I'd like to do more question shows where we don't have to ask for questions on Facebook, although I'd love to do that again. But please send in your tech questions, and we'll gather those together and do maybe we'll try to every other couple episodes, we'll have a question segment. Or maybe we'll skip the App of the Day segment one time and answer a couple listener questions. So send those in, Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. You can also find me on Twitter at ArcheoWebby, ArcheoWebby. And Paul, you are at?
I'm on Twitter at Lugal. That's Lugal. Or you can send me email at paul@lugal.com.
All right. Excellent. And thanks for everybody for listening. And we will talk to you next time. Paul's going to go on Amazon and buy some clothes. We'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.